day.
Tonight, support for a sector in crisis. Another $500 million pledged to help aged care deal with COVID-19. Also tonight, what went so wrong for Territory Alliance in the seat of Blaine? The desperate need for overseas pickers in the top end to stop an industry going to rot. And what a monster, Catherine's biggest croc in years caught in a nature park. Good evening, Eleni Roussos with ABC News. Emergency subsidies to help aged care homes control COVID-19 will stay in place for another 6 months. The federal government has put down another $560 million, acknowledging the sector still has a long battle ahead with the virus. At the same time, it's putting pressure on Victoria to reopen its economy. Here's National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
Families can't go to work. We're subject to curfew. You can't move more than 5 kilometres from your home.
3 weeks cooped up in Canberra makes for one tetchy treasurer.
The damage is immense. We need to hear more from Daniel Andrews.
Imploring a premier to talk, Josh Frydenberg's telling every available microphone,
I will call it out.
A tale of fiasco in his home state of epic proportions.
This has to be the biggest public policy failure by a state government in living memory.
He's not alone. In a full parliamentary pile-on from north of the border.
The most major impact on the population of any state or territory in terms of restrictions, arguably in 100 years.
The Morrison government's anxious to hear of Dan Andrews' plans for many reasons. One is cost, with 2.5 million Victorians on job seeker and job keeper payments alone. But as ever, it's about balancing the health risks, and the Commonwealth's own spending decisions suggest those risks remain immense.
Taking total Australian investment in COVID-19 aged care support to $1.5 million.
With $560 million, the government's extending funding to retain workers, testers and infection control regimes in aged care homes that otherwise would have expired.
We need to send a message to our workers in residential aged care that they are very important.
At roughly $1,000 per resident and more in the regions, the subsidy's meant to give an incentive to staff to keep showing up, but it only maintains the current settings.
Aged care residents are now so neglected that up to half are suffering from malnutrition.
The government will continue to take action each and every day, as we indeed have again today.
The real funding fixes still lie ahead in the budget and on next year's release of the findings of the Aged Care Royal Commission. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
Victoria's Premier has promised to announce a roadmap out of restrictions on Sunday. There were 73 new COVID cases today and 8 people died overnight. But the state's death toll actually rose by 41 because it included a backlog of aged care deaths that hadn't been reported. James Hancock reports.
Victoria's most senior federal Liberal took to the telly to hammer home his call for a way out of lockdown.
And Victorians are looking elsewhere across the country and saying, why not us? Yet we don't hear about a definitive plan.
I'm not here to argue with Josh Frydenberg.
The state government has promised a plan by Sunday after many more meetings with businesses, unions and community groups.
Another week's data is critically important.
The Premier's flagged the stages coming out of lockdown won't look the same as those going in.
But we're not going to be able to necessarily give every single sector a hard and fast date at which they will be reopening. Some will have to be subject to the data and the case numbers.
Our businesses needs enough time this time around to be able to prepare effectively for any easing of restrictions.
The plan could see more outdoor service for bars, pubs, cafes and restaurants.
We do have footpath trading at the moment. It would be great if there was some kind of arrangement where we could extend that.
While more businesses will be allowed to open, what won't change anytime soon is working from home. And face coverings will still be compulsory for those who have to be at work.
There is a willingness to be flexible and to adjust to whatever the needs are.
Gatherings at home were blamed for fuelling the second wave and could still be off limits.
It might be a while before you can have a barbecue with a large number of friends or even family, like a big gathering.
Another 73 cases is Victoria's lowest daily figure for 9 weeks, and the Chief Health Officer hopes it'll be 40 or 50 by the end of the week.
We're all fed up with it, absolutely fed up with it, but holding the course, even as we get down to these very low numbers, is absolutely critical.
Because nobody wants a third wave. James Hancock, ABC News, Melbourne.
If you delve beneath today's coronavirus numbers out of Victoria, there are positive signs. Community transmission has dropped significantly and there's reduced spread in aged care as well. Here's our analyst Casey Briggs.
The 41 deaths reported today in Victoria are masking an overall drop in current death rates. 33 of these deaths occurred prior to last Thursday, leaving 8 families grieving lost loved ones in the past 24 hours. And that actually nudges the 7-day average down again, hopefully a sign of things to come. The government's undercounting of fatalities is nearly rectified. The Chief Health Officer says there are a small number more cases that are yet to be included and they should appear in the coming days. Hospitalisation rates across the state, they're continuing to fall back, as are aged care resident infections. We're now seeing less than 20 aged care residents infected per day on average. As for the other significant category of infections that we've been tracking, well, healthcare workers are making up an increasingly large share of infections. On the rolling average, they're just under half of all of the state's new cases. It's not that health outbreaks are getting far, far worse. It's just that community transmission rates across the rest of the state are dropping faster. New South Wales is down to the single digits. That Sydney CBD cluster with explosive potential hasn't appeared to have panned out that way, at least not for now. One note of caution though, and that is that testing rates are often down in New South Wales on Monday and Tuesday. So the question is, will we see numbers like 4 continuing later in the week as these test numbers pick up?
2 former Labor Prime Ministers have joined forces to attack what they say is a coalition push to dump a planned increase in superannuation. The so-called superannuation guarantee is paid on top of workers' wages and is legislated to steadily rise for the next 5 years. Paul Keating and Kevin Rudd say any move would betray workers. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
It takes a lot to bring Prime Ministers together. Campaign launches and defending legacies.
Grand theft Liberal Party style against the working population of Australia.
This is a cruel assault by Morrison.
2 former Labor PMs in synchronised, simultaneous attack, believing the government's poised to break an election promise that would affect millions of workers.
Are you abandoning the increase in the superannuation guarantee?
We have no plans to increase taxes.
The superannuation guarantee, currently 9.5%, hasn't moved in 6 years. It's legislated to hit 10% in July next year, then increasing by 0.5 percentage point every year after that until it reaches 12% in 2025.
It's a great litmus test. It's a dipstick into whether the government has any ideas about the future.
Paul Keating, the architect of Australia's superannuation system, urging the government to ignore a cabal of Liberals calling for a freeze of superannuation at 9.5%, when MPs already collect 15.4%.
The gall of it, I mean the heartlessness of it, the unfairness of it.
And if you're with one of these... The super industry is ramping up a campaign in the face of claims by the Reserve Bank Governor and others that a rise in the super guarantee would further limit wage growth.
If this increase goes ahead, I would expect wage growth to be even lower than it otherwise would be.
Pigs might fly. That is the biggest bullshit argument I have ever heard.
So under the cowardly talk of the COVID crisis, they want to gyp ordinary people by 2.5% of their income for the rest of their life.
Wages have barely risen above inflation for the best part of a decade, yet company profits have been slicing a bigger and bigger share of the national income. In fact, even in the middle of a pandemic, the stock market's been doing exceptionally well. So if the government does abandon the super increase, the political challenge might be explaining why it wants to deny workers the only form of extra money that's on offer. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
An interim report from the Royal Commission investigating the last fire season has raised the prospect of changing the national bushfire alert system and bolstering the country's water bombing fleet. Here's political reporter Anna Henderson.
The bushfire season from hell. 33 lives lost, thousands left homeless, a nation blanketed in smoke and ash. Many still picking up the pieces.
We got deployed into property protection at the top of the hill, and I stood all night and listened to my house burn. Yeah.
I feel personally that we were just left to our own devices and that we had no support.
The Commission heard resources were stretched to the limit across the nation.
That's not normal fire behaviour. It's just a holocaust. And it's not stoppable.
Today, advice from the Commission.
I know many of you are still living with the effects and devastation of the 2019 and 20 bushfires and are apprehensive about the impending bushfire season.
Today's interim report doesn't involve recommendations, but it does pose a number of questions, including whether the Commonwealth should have the legal power to declare a state of emergency, whether the Watch and Act bushfire alert is confusing and needs to change, and if governments need to buy more water bombers. The Royal Commissioners also identified challenges in the way firefighting resources are shared between states, suggesting the pandemic approach of regular national cabinet meetings should become a natural disaster staple.
What the report effectively says is that what we've dealt with isn't unprecedented. It means this is what we're going to have to deal with into the future.
This inquiry was never going to be a finger-pointing exercise, and there will be recommendations handed down in the final report due at the end of October. But with fires already burning in parts of the nation, there's a great sense of urgency among residents in bushfire-prone communities. They want action now to avoid mistakes being repeated. Anna Henderson, ABC News, Canberra.
In the top end, the fire outlook found that while it had been drier than usual, high humidity this month helped to reduce the number of fires. That's despite last week's dangerous conditions, which saw catastrophic fire warnings issued for the first time since 2015. A review of fire season activity and overall fuel loads indicates the Territory's outlook from now up until November is normal, and that if the predicted La Niña weather event occurs, an earlier wet season is likely, which could cut the fire season short. And a 24-year-old man has appeared before the Darwin Local Court, charged over last week's bushfire at Adelaide River. The fire, allegedly lit by Cabe Goddard, burnt through 190 hectares of land, destroyed several vehicles and threatened one home. Bushfires NT says it took more than 20 people around 34 hours to bring the blaze under control. Goddard was arrested in Pine Creek on Friday and refused bail. He'll remain behind bars and return to court at the end of October. More than a week after Territorians went to the polls, 4 seats remain on a knife edge, with postal votes being accepted until Friday. Blaine in Palmerston is one of those tight seats, and voters there are reflecting on why they made the decision to oust a former Chief Minister.
In the wake of the NT election, these Palmerston seniors want to see some action from their local politicians.
We're worried about ourselves here and now.
She lives in the electorate which saw one of the biggest upsets of the 2020 election, the deposition of the member for Blaine, Terry Mills. Mr Mills came third in the 3-horse race for Blaine, and Josie Hill was among those who voted against the former Chief Minister.
Simply because we didn't see him, really. Didn't actually see him, we saw his people.
A perceived lack of focus on crime within the electorate by the former MLA, who did not respond to a request for interview, played into this Maldon resident's decision to cast her vote elsewhere.
I thought he was not realistic. I don't think he really realised what the problems were with the crime and the thefts and the car stealing and everything.
The direction of Mr Mills's fledgling party, Territory Alliance, and the leader's perceived flip-flopping on policies, especially fracking, also factored into voters' decisions.
It's like the fracking, you know, he changed from one to another. And so I just felt that you couldn't trust him.
There's very little action here at the Blaine electorate office today. It's one of 4 seats across the territory, still very much in play, with postal and declaration votes still to be counted. In Blaine, it's separated by just 14 votes, with the CLP and ALP nearly neck and neck. One thing is certain though, its former member, Terry Mills, has all but packed up and moved on.
One of those still in contention is Country Liberals candidate Matthew Curl, who's trailing Labor's candidate, former policeman Mark Turner. With postal votes still trickling in until Friday, he's got a plan to ward off the nerves.
I'm going to go camping with my family.
Counting resumes tomorrow, but with the seats of Araluen, Namatjira, Barkly and Blaine hanging on a thread, a result may be still some days off. Matt Garrick, ABC News.
Still to come this hour, how huge demand on Australia Post is creating surging profits and delays.
I don't know how their system works, but whatever's going on isn't working for me. And I don't think it's working for anyone else.
I've never seen anything like this. We're delivering Christmas every day.
Plus, can you catch COVID-19 twice? Dr Norman Swan on the emerging evidence. That's coming up.
The US city of Portland has been rocked by another night of protests, and federal authorities are saying that all options remain on the table to quell the continued unrest. Donald Trump's Democratic rival Joe Biden has joined the city's mayor in accusing the president of encouraging division and stoking violence. It followed the shooting of a right-wing supporter and clashes between a pro-Trump rally and Black Lives Matter protesters. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
2 shots ring out, a man stumbles and collapses to the ground. Pepper spray consumes the air.
I got mace in my eyes.
The man filming this video struggles to focus.
Do you have anything for eyes stuff?
Within a minute, police are on the scene. Paramedics render first aid, but it's too late. The man belonged to the far-right group Patriot Prayer. Members have repeatedly clashed with Black Lives Matter protesters since the death of George Floyd in May. The shooting happened 15 minutes after a troop of 600 cars, part of a pro-Trump rally, passed through downtown Portland. They fired pepper spray and paintballs. The city's Democratic mayor delivered a blistering attack on the president.
It's you who have created the hate and the division. And it's you who claimed that white supremacists are good people.
The president tweeted through his press conference, calling the mayor a wacky radical left do-nothing Democrat. All up, he tweeted 89 times in just 3 hours this morning.
The Democrats have accused the president of exploiting this latest bout of violence to further stoke the culture wars we're seeing play out on the streets of America and feed his campaign strategy of law and order.
National Guard troops are on the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the wake of the latest police shooting of Jacob Blake. Donald Trump will travel there this week, even though the city's Democratic mayor says now is not the right time. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
The coronavirus outbreak in India is now the fastest spreading in the world. For the past 2 days, it's reported close to 79,000 infections, the highest numbers ever recorded by any country. The death toll now stands at over 64,000. India is the world's 3rd worst affected country, but is soon expected to overtake Brazil. Global infections have just passed 25 million. The surge in cases in India comes as the government lifts restrictions to try to boost the ailing economy. But employers are struggling to lure migrant workers back to the cities. South Asia correspondent James Ocean reports.
Mumbai in the monsoon, and around a dozen labourers are making slow progress on this construction site.
These workers fled the city as it became engulfed with coronavirus. Now they've returned, desperate to work.
I came back to the city because there was no work at my place. I had no other option.
India's reliance on migrant workers was exposed when the country went into a nationwide lockdown in March. Some were kicked off their work site, others just wanted to get home. Many walked hundreds of kilometres in what became the largest internal migration since independence. One of them was Rampukar Pandit. He became a symbol of the migration when this photo was taken. His wife had just called to say their infant son was gravely ill. He didn't make it home on time. His son died.
I miss my son very much. Had I been here, I would have saved him.
One recent survey found a third of migrant workers have ruled out returning to the cities.
I think that treatment given to the migrants were so bad, they don't mind dying, even starvation, at villages rather than going back.
Companies like this one are now offering sweeteners to try and lure back their staff from faraway states.
My employer provided me a return ticket, accommodation on site, and took care of my welfare.
The importance of migrant workers has been fully highlighted by this lockdown.
Supporting one of the country's most valuable resources. James Oaten, ABC News.
Northern Territory mango farmers are in limbo tonight, waiting to hear if migrant workers crucial to getting crops picked will be allowed into the country. The group from Vanuatu will need approval from their government to travel to Australia, but the window to get to the top end in time for harvest is closing fast.
It was supposed to be a lifeline for an industry desperately in need. Workers from Vanuatu chartered into the Northern Territory for jobs Australians simply couldn't fill.
No pickers, no fruit being picked, no fruit being packed, no fruit, and really devastating for business.
170 mango pickers were supposed to arrive in Darwin tomorrow, the federal government's solution to chronic labour shortages.
Without the workers to harvest the fruit, the majority of that fruit is going to be left to rot on the ground. So yeah, this is an incredibly vital part of the equation.
But without the Vanuatu government on board, that plan is on hold, leaving local growers in limbo.
We only have 5-6 weeks of the year where we have, in average, where we have an opportunity to basically earn the money that we spend all year round. So yeah, it's quite crucial.
Vanuatu is coronavirus free, with international travel locked down to keep it that way. If the group gets the green light, it will be the first seasonal workers allowed out of the country and into Australia since the pandemic struck.
Yes, I'm still hopeful that we can still get this trial going and that we can also look to other countries such as potentially Samoa and East Timor to get the workers over that we need.
The Northern Territory mango industry is worth around $120 million a year to the local economy and relies on up to 2,000 seasonal workers to pick the annual crop. Growers will have to make do with considerably less this year, but they're confident of getting the fruit to market.
Well, we will try our utmost best that we can assure that you will have mangoes and all the way through Christmas and after Christmas and get to eat a juicy mango.
A sweet result in testing times. Amy Colbert, ABC News.
The Ghan will once again become a regular sight in the Northern Territory after being derailed for 5 months because of COVID-19. Today it arrived in Alice Springs, where passengers spent the afternoon sightseeing in town before an overnight trip to Katherine.
It's been 5 months off the rails for the Ghan, but now the journey between Adelaide and Darwin is back on track. It was a welcome sight for train spotters as it rumbled through Alice Springs' iconic gap, and there was movement at the station as the passengers disembarked at their first stop in the Northern Territory.
It's really exciting after being off for 5 months, getting back on the tracks, starting the tourism industry up again.
Passengers were welcomed by health officials before being whisked away by local tourism operators for their Alice Springs afternoon. And it wasn't just locals who were happy to see the train back in the Northern Territory.
It's a lovely sight, it really is. Coming in, it's going so slow. Coming in, it's something different.
While COVID safety procedures mean capacity on the train has to be limited, staff say that does come with some extra perks.
means we've got more space in the restaurant and the lounge car, but also more time to spend looking after their guests and making sure they've got an extra glass of champagne.
The train is scheduled to arrive in Darwin tomorrow afternoon. Mitchell Abram, ABC News, Alice Springs.
To finance now, and both the Australian dollar and the local share market eased back today. Here's Alan Kohler.
We're now into the curtain raisers for this Wednesday's June quarter national accounts and GDP, which means today is company profits. And guess what? They boomed because of government payments, specifically JobKeeper. And basically, some businesses, like supermarkets, are doing great, and those that aren't are getting government cash that goes straight to the bottom line. Because even though sales have to be down at least 30% to qualify for JobKeeper, that money, the JobKeeper money, is pure profit. And by the way, Australia's fiscal support is now 13% of GDP, which is the third highest in the world, more than the United States, Japan, the UK, Europe and China. New Zealand is way out in front of that peloton. But the Reserve Bank of Australia is the least supportive central bank. It's ruled out negative interest rates, and as this graph shows, it's buying the least amount of government debt, which is the way that other central banks are supporting fiscal policy. The Australian dollar eased back a bit today, at least against the US dollar, but not the rest. And so did the share market, with shopping centres and energy stocks up strongly, while the pizza sector went cold. Our market went against a generally stronger global trend, and commodities were all up as well. Gold and silver, oil and iron ore. And that's finance.
Northern Territory wildlife rangers have caught what they say is the biggest crocodile trapped in the Katherine region in years. The massive 4.4 metre croc was caught in a trap at the Flora River Nature Park, about 120 kilometres south of Katherine. Rangers estimate the crocodile is about 50 years old and say it's a timely reminder that crocs are on the move.
With the weather warming up, the crocodiles are becoming active. Obviously, they're moving into breeding season as well. The rivers are low. They're out looking for mates, particularly the big males. So, yeah, we tell people to be croc-wise all year, but it certainly should be emphasised at this time of the year without a doubt.
The reptile has been taken to a crocodile farm where it will join the breeding stock. Time for the weather now, and tonight's pic taken at Lee Point in Darwin was sent in by Kerry Barker. It was a windy day across the Territory with cooler conditions in the south. Humidity was up slightly in Darwin today. The city reached a top of 35 degrees, 37 in Jabiru. It got down to 10 degrees in Alice Springs this morning, a top of 27 today, 32 in Tennant Creek and 36 the top in Katherine. Around Australia today, Sydney reached 21, 15 in Canberra and Adelaide and 27 the top for Brisbane. On the satellite, a clearing cold front is generating winds and showers to southeastern Australia, and a high is keeping conditions elsewhere mostly clear. A ridge is developing over the Queensland coast. It will produce hot, dry and windy conditions across the northwest top end. Interstate tomorrow, it'll be cloudy in most capitals, a top of 14 degrees in Canberra and Hobart, 15 in Melbourne and showers in Perth, 16. To our north, storms in Bangkok and Singapore, cloudy in Dili and rain for Port Moresby. Back home, it'll be a little warmer in the centre tomorrow, a top of 31 in Alice Springs, 33 in Yulara and Tennant Creek. Getting down to 19 degrees tonight in Katherine, 37 tomorrow, cloudy in Borroloola, 35 and 30 in Nhulunbuy. Up top, it'll be warm and dry in Darwin with a top of 35, 36 on the Tiwi Islands, hot in Batchelor, 38. A severe fire danger warning remains in place for Darwin and Adelaide River. There'll be a low tide at 12:30 in the afternoon and a high tide of 6 metres will be around 6 p.m. Sunrise will be at 10 to 7 and you can catch the sun go down at 6:43. And the outlook for Darwin this week, winds will ease and humidity will increase again from Wednesday. In Alice Springs, staying warm until the weekend when the next cool change arrives. And to stay up to date with the latest news from the Northern Territory, head to our website, news.abc.net.au. Stay with us now. Lee Sales is up next with 7:30.